Hello, and welcome to All the Grief, a regular podcast for all those who have been touched by grief. We are your hosts. I am Rebecca Luttrell.
And I am Andrea and Rebecca. We are two friends, a therapist, and a social scientist, both highly sensitive fellow grievers, here to share our hearts as we talk about all the grief. Good morning, Rebecca.
Good morning, Andrea.
How is your heart?
My heart is a mix of really tender and really delighted. So let me explain. So my sister, her family, they recently moved to Sweden, and I feel like it's been just all the things of a transition that are really challenging and can hold a lot of sudden and unexpected grief. And her son, they have a requirement in Sweden that you, in fact, not homeschool. You can go to jail for homeschooling in Sweden. And there's only a month left of school, but they had to put her son in school for this final month. And she was really nervous because they know the language. They studied hard on Duolingo, and that gets you about nowhere. And so they're immersed. It's like people are saying things, and I know the word, and my brain is just like, I don't know what you're saying. There's something different. And so she's been feeling that. Her son is really sensory sensitive. And so yesterday was his first day of school, and she just left me this video message this morning, just in tears about the day. And it mostly went well, but then lunch and recess, they let her be there for the day, sitting back. And she's like, oh my gosh, he's playing, he's running, he looks so happy. And they leave after lunch, and he just starts crying, and he never cries. Anger is his default. And so she's like, oh, these are some big emotions. And now she's crying, and she hasn't been able to stop crying since yesterday. Basically, there was this kid who was really excited about him from New Zealand who spoke English more fluently than some of the other kids. So he was like, oh, I'll take you around. And he's like, he wouldn't stop touching me. And he was pulling me around. And so he was trying to be a good sport. And then just seeing her tender heart and recognizing that the way that grief in the current moment just brings back all the grief. And I'm like, you just need to cry. You just need to let yourself cry. Anyway, the delight is that she said, and if you have any ideas for how to regulate my nervous system, and I was like, I thought you'd never ask. So I felt useful in that moment, but also just really have to let yourself cry. The things that are here. And I was just saying with her because I know all the grief that they've gone through in their life, and that grief is up. It's just let the feeling be up and don't get caught in the story and just keep moving through you. But also, if you want me to do a daily nervous system hack, I will do that. She's on board. So it's I feel tender and delighted.
You've shared a bit with me about their journey, and I hope that he has a little friend and can figure out how to tell him his boundary. And that can make it more useful.
It's so weird because it is it is a boundary violation in this way. That's not his comfort zone, but it's such a loving boundary violation.
Totally. It's excitement and
I want you to be part of everything. And he's like, stop touching me.
Well, thank you.
How is your heart this morning?
My heart, this is such a strange time for me. May. It's my birthday month, which used to be, yay, it's my birthday month. And Mother's Day is just really hard. It's always been a really complicated day ever since I became a mom. I think the transition of becoming a mom, but it's still Mother's Day is about your mother and my family. Mother's Day was still about my mother. And so it was just this weird day where I felt people wanted me to make it about me, but I really felt like it's not my turn. Even though I'm not a mom, it's not my turn. And of course now I have a really difficult relationship with my mom now. And so that makes it really hard. And it's right around when it's the month my dad died. We're coming up on that 6 years, and I can't even, it's just hard to believe, So I think every season I wish I could just blink and then it's June 1st. And I never want time to go fast, but this is just a really hard month for me. I don't like it.
Yeah.
And I used to love it, and now I just want it to be over. So that's where I am. I feel in it because Mother's Day is this weekend, and that's the beginning of, this is hard. So yeah, that's where I am.
Okay. I'm wrapping your heart up in my heart. I love you.
Well, today I'm so excited. Sometimes we get to talk to people all over the world, but this is the first time we get to talk to somebody in Nairobi, Kenya. And I'm so excited. Today we are talking with Carl Manlan. Carl is Chief Partnerships and Business Development at AGRA. He has also held senior positions at Visa and for Central and Eastern European, Middle East, and Africa region at EcoBank Foundation, among many other influential roles. His expertise has been featured in Forbes, Scientific American, Le Monde, El País, and World Economic Forum. He is also a co-host of his own podcast that he has with his daughter, Inside the Blueprint. But behind this 30,000-foot view of global systems lies a very personal journey of profound loss, a reflection on how grief reshapes us, softens us, and unexpectedly leads us back to meaning. His writing explores the emotional scaffolding of renewal, the quiet work of healing, and the inner forms of prosperity that no economic system can measure. I'm so excited to welcome you, Carl, to All the Grief.
Thank you, Andrea and Rebecca.
Yeah,
I'm very happy to be here.
As are we. So, Carl, how is your heart this morning?
It's afternoon in Nairobi now, but the heart is still processing what the long day has been. And today my heart is full on two things. Full on the fact that I have done some work which is starting to come to fruition. So you have that moment just before it just happens. And then I'm also thinking about the fact that for many years, I lived in a city which is going through trauma. I lived in Dubai for almost 5 years. So there's that grief as well about a city that gave me so much and is going through a difficult period. So you have this constant tension. And as I was listening to both of you, between a young person that is transitioning to a new city, which I've done many times, and is trying to figure out, okay, what the things he has lost and what is maybe coming his way, but he can't really see. And then there's this boy from New Zealand that suddenly sort of shows that path and that light for him. And then listening to you about May being a difficult month, I have two special days in month. My wedding anniversary is in May, and then my daughter's birthday is also in May. So you see that in the duality of life. One month that may not necessarily be something that brings joy is the opposite for that. And I mean, to me, this is what grief is about. So my heart is actually right in that middle where one side is love, the other side is grieving. And they really, that balance that we often don't recognize. Listening to both your stories and thinking about that young boy, he's grieving in a way, but he's probably not using those terms because we are taught about grief very late. At least sort of the expression of it doesn't come early. So yes, this is where I am, and also very happy to be sharing this moment for both of you.
Oh my goodness. Well, I hadn't expected to ask you so quickly, but it feels so apropos to what you just said. You have a poem called Become Sad. Would you mind reading that for us right now?
I will do that.
Thank you.
I encountered sadness on my way to Pepe. Mama carried the cross on her own. The nurse who knew, the nurse who believed, the nurse who breathed lives, the nurse who tried, the daughter who could not, the sister who could not, the niece who could not, the mother who could not. Death is love. Jesus died on the cross. The cross we let go. Mama, I did not know. Pepe was no longer. Mama experienced something. What I could feel did not match anything I knew, as words did not match numb. Maybe sadness is a word for that moment. Simply my first experience of grief.
I'm already crying. Thank you.
Thank you, Carl. That was such a beautiful poem to come across before we hopped live on the air. Rebecca was lovingly joking that there's no wrong poem in this book to be read on air. They're all so beautiful, but I had dog-eared that one among many because it was that first moment where a child doesn't even have words for the big experience that they're having. And so often, like you just were saying in your check-in, we don't identify grief. We don't identify that as a process that we're moving through. Probably imagine we talk about feelings with little kids, like sad, mad, frustrated. But grief is such an all-encompassing process. It's like it's rageful, it's devastating. These moments of remembrance and joy and laughter, it's love. So
Right.
I just thought it was such a beautiful poem. I could feel little Carl. And then in Rebecca's check-in and your reflection on it just felt so perfect. So thank you.
Welcome.
Yeah.
So Carl, and it may or may not be related to that poem, I don't know, but when you think about your grief origin story, so the moment when grief came into your life and kind of created a before and after moment, what is that grief origin story for you?
So it's actually connected to this poem that you selected, and I didn't have the word for it because the word for grief in French is chagrin, but
Mm,
it's often associated with like a love relationship that sort of fails. So you don't really have that expression. And to me, it's shortly after my grandfather passed away. He was the first, and in that case, that was what God was to me.
of
Every
course.
Sunday to his home, always being there, having that little shiny note that he would slip into my hand. Then he died.
Yeah.
I knew something was off because my mother was not being a nurse. She could see there was something, and then it happened. And his burial was on my first communion. So you have this moment where you am walking into the church, this procession of all these children dressed in white, and then you have this beautiful hymn on this holy day that God has given us. And here I am not understanding what it means because I was brought up believing that God is love. But then you have this tension between the fact that how does this loving God takes away something from you on that day? But it didn't take it on that day, but it happened that the burial had to be on that day. So I now have the intersection of faith, love, death, all in one. And I didn't understand fully, but there's one thing that I remember. I did not do my confirmation the following year. And my parents never forced me. I just that the association of that moment and being in church for a joyous occasion, which is also a grief moment, because I ended up with my father, my two sisters, and my brother. None of the aunt's friends were around because they all went to the funeral. So, but at the same time, I saw a duality. We're talking about grief being the other side of love, where I was celebrating the first communion. And for everyone that is raised in the Catholic faith, this is a very important moment. At the same time, my God on earth was leaving. So I found myself that I couldn't put words to it as I did it now. I couldn't explain exactly what it was, but there was certainly something in me that changed.
Yeah.
Because then the next Sunday when I went to my grandparents' house, it was just my grandmother, she's equally important. But it's not the same relationship that sort of existed. So that was a before and after moment. But then in 89, I wouldn't have been able to express it in those words. And having, then it goes on and then you sort of say, okay, what does it mean to lose someone that you care, that deeply cares about you, that is not your father or your mother, but has expressed so much love and appreciation for who you are without really any questions. He just loves you because you come from his daughter.
Yeah.
So you have that very deep connection to something that he loves by association with what you represent. It's a piece of his daughter that is living through you. So yeah, it was that moment, back in 89 when it happened. I wouldn't have been able to have the words of the emotions to sort of process that.
I can totally understand, especially for a child, also the way that we associate just timelines and things. And so the idea of even a milestone moment in the church being tied to this really devastating milestone moment in your life. And I imagine some fear of if I have another one of those milestone moments in the church, might I have a devastating milestone moment in my life? I think we've heard a lot from people who experienced grief really young, that becomes this sort of like background worry of like, are these two things inextricably linked forever?
And I feel curious. So, in the absence of a word in language, which I feel language is so important, and there's so many ways when people study linguistics and talk about the way language even structures our thinking, our relationship to the world. I'm wondering within your family, was there a way that that grief was held or tended to, or did you feel kind of dropped? Like, what did you witness in your family system that taught you something?
We don't speak about grief. Emotions are not necessarily named. You sort of, that your parents love you and they express it in different way. But I didn't grow up with really being able to call that feeling. I knew it existed. I knew my parents loved me. I can maybe count a number of times when I heard them say it. Not because they didn't love me, but it wasn't something that is necessarily part of the way the lingua sort of evolves. And it's not a criticism. It is the way that this was being expressed. And when I did a book reading a couple of weeks ago, and when we finished, there was a guest in the room that happens to be a psychologist. And she asked me the question, why didn't you write it in French? And because she says a lot of the emotions that you are carrying in your book happen when you were much younger, when you lived through those emotions in French. And I said to her, going back to the question about language, and I said to her, I took the lazy route because by writing in English, there are things that I was not ready to deal with in the language where these happen. So I parked it. And then we had a follow-up conversation where we spent 2.5 hours together to just talking about through this thing. And she happens to be a psychologist. And we had this very beautiful human conversation around grief because she's also going through her own experience of grief. And the language that we often choose is also to protect ourselves because, grief takes time. We have to be in a place where we feel comfortable. And, when you write poetry, you don't write it necessarily for the rest of the world. You write it for yourself to heal through the process and to sort of get a sense of how do you then express in language those emotions that you have? How do you write them? How do you feel when you write them? So going through that exercise was the year 25, which if you look at the book, the forward date of the 8th of September 2025, my friend Susanna, who lives in Argentina, sent it to me around 8 p.m. or 9 p.m. that evening. That was the day I was fired. So you have these moments where grief, in a way, presents itself differently. Then you have this message from Argentina that arrives. And then again, the duality of life.
Yeah.
This one is closed. Well, finish your book. And that's the beauty of a language because language also can be transmitted without words necessarily. So Susanna, sitting in Argentina, had no idea what was happening to me in Dubai. But somehow, she felt that that was a time for her to send that forward that is in the book. And I kept the date, because it's a reminder for me of the power of a language, of the power of words, of the power of this moment where the unexpected, like death, sometimes you don't expect it and it just happens,
I feel like you've spoken to the duality a few times this morning, and it reminds me of Tango, the one where you're talking about
Yes.
grief and joy and moving in that way. And as you're saying all of these things, I feel like this huge question is up for me that you go from there's not a lot in the language, there's not a way to even name it grief. And now you're just writing about grief, 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 grief. So, like, how did you start to come into relationship with your own grief and know, oh, that's what 10-year-old me was experiencing? When did it really become nameable as grief and identifiable as grief for you in your life?
I think it was the second time. I was a student in South Africa when my father passed away. And I think I was mature enough to start to understand what it meant at that point. Also, I did my confirmation in Cape Town. So there was a gap between that 89 moment and then in about 2000 doing the confirmation.
Wow.
And that was a way for me to sort of say, I have to continue to live. And part of living is completing what we start. You don't leave things sort of hanging. You have to finish the process. And doing this, and then November 2001, when that hit, I had a blueprint. I had experienced these feelings before. It's not the same intensity because the circumstances were completely different. But I had now words to express it. I had matured from having to live in different places, leaving family in Cote d'Ivoire, moving to Zimbabwe, and moving to South Africa. And when I was listening to your nephew's story or your sister's story of moving to a new country and having to understand what it means to be you in that new space. Okay. And in that process of trying to understand who you are in that space, you have to deal with a full spectrum of emotions. You can't just park this one and say, no, that one, it will continue to be there and I don't know what it is. I don't want to name it. And me going through the confirmation, it was now saying to myself, you must have faith. And having faith is also accepting that death is part of it. So you can't just say, I believe, and then, there's this part about that eventually die, which is the only certainty that we have. We don't know when, but that's the only certainty that it will end. And that experience of being in South Africa, in a country that was also in transition. When I came to South Africa in 1999, it was the second democratically elected president. President Thabo Mbeki came to power. And I was a student who barely understood the English language was, yes, it was okay to me, but it was still new. So when you were telling me about your nephew, I was like, yeah, I mean, I was much older, but then you have to go beyond who I was then to ask myself, how do I complete my degree in a foreign language? And we tend to associate grieving with only dying, but no, we grieve every day. That sort of who you were is no longer that person that is required for you to move to the next level. Therefore, okay, I need to park this person. And in parking that person, you realize that there are things that you need to figure out. And I became very comfortable with the idea of seeing a psychologist after my father passed away, which when I was home for the funeral and there's a psychologist that came to me and she said, I'm here to help you. I didn't really understand what she meant by I'm here to help you. But she planted the seed. So I think the ability to be able to name is also accepting the fact that we as individuals need to seek help and accept help when it's given, in whichever form it is, because we go through grief in different ways. And my experience of grief is very different. But one thing which is common to all of us is that we don't know that feeling until it happens.
Yeah. You have this beautiful reflection on that time as you close the second section of your poetry book. It's the poem Tears. Would you mind reading that to us? I think it speaks to the complexity, so many of the complexities of becoming.
Yes, Tears. Uphold masculinity in silence. Uphold strength in silence. Uphold tradition in adversity. Tears weaken the fabric of society in public masculine identity. Heroic gesture of weak internal strength. Pillars of strength in families, communities around and beyond. Emotions cried out, cloud judgment, like the soul calls for relief. Tears pressure breaker of excess, yet a sign of inability. In quiet, silent soul, regenerative. In the midst of a funeral, I found an escape. Rinse my soul. I was caught behaving against principles of masculinity. Remaining time held my tears in my soul's bladder.
Thank you.
That part, holding my tears in my soul's bladder, I was, ugh. I mean, and listening, having even more context, listening to where you were and this transition of life of being in university, which is such a transformational time. And I'm so glad that you spoke to these ways that we're grieving all the time, even though we mostly think about grief and death. And I think Rebecca and I, when we were starting this podcast, that was really our intention, was we wanted to talk about and shed light on all of the grief that we're experiencing all the time, the heartache of where you lived, the heartache of Dubai, the heartache of, I think about, I lived in Honduras for a couple of years, and it's not even a country I can go back to because of how dangerous it is. And I feel such grief for the beauty, the love, the people, the experiences, all the food I ate. So I didn't lose anyone in death, but there's such a grief and a mourning about that. So in having the context of your transition into university, which is also a transition into adulthood for many of us, and part of that as a man is let's transition into this whole step into masculinity and this moment of like, I'm also losing my dad. Like I'm also in this moment, a child losing my father. It was really touching. And I think a really important poem that reflects the pressure of masculinity and holding those emotions. Yeah.
It does.
Yeah, it was really beautiful. So your journey, I also want to say, was not a direct line from brief experiences to a poetry book. Not at all. So talk to us a little bit, and I'd love to spend some time talking about this other world that you inhabit.
I think it started very early because I studied economics and finance as a student. And the first 10 years of my career, I was working in health. And my father was a medical doctor. My mother was a nurse. And my mother had always wanted me to become a banker, which before she passed, I told her, but you were never talking about numbers. You were always talking about saving lives. And I grew up in these where the HIV pandemic was quite high. So when they were coming home or when they were late from home, the stories that I was hearing were related to trying to save a life, trying to understand this new virus and how it was affecting. So I said that there was nothing in what I was learning at home and listening at home that made me want to be a banker. But I understood because that's a epitome of success. You have to have a real profession. Banker, engineer, lawyer. These are the real professions. And if I look at my professional life, the first 10 years were in health. The following 10 years were in financial services. And this is the first time in my life that I'm in a field that I'm not related to either what my mother wanted me to do or what my parents were doing. So the book, in a way, comes at a time where I am becoming me as a person. And I'm stepping into my own path. So the 8th of September, yes, I was pushed out, but it's okay. Because that had to happen for me to get into the next phase of my life and to say to my parents, I did everything that you would have wanted me to do. I worked in health, I worked in financial services, and now I'm in a new field that I did not think that I would be in, but that's where I am today. So that journey, yes, was not linear at all, because when you are 22 and you lose your father and you don't live in the same space anymore, the connection that he had also disappear. So suddenly you have to figure out, once I get my degree, who's going to be opening that door? Because you need that sort of reference of somebody who calls and says, my son is qualified. And there was a gentleman from Peru who at that time I had never met that used to work with my father that opened the door for me. So it wasn't linear. I didn't expect it. It happened. That door was open. I entered. And from there, I took the opportunities that were coming my way without necessarily knowing which would be the next. But I was convinced that that was the right thing to do. And, I moved from the internship to employment into one of the largest fund that was created to fight HIV, TB, and malaria. So circling back to this childhood and listening about the stories about people that were suffering from the disease, the virus that was, and then I spent about 10 years in that space. of understanding what it means to be moving billions of dollars to solve for HIV, TB, and malaria. And then from there, I really wanted to move out of Geneva, not because I didn't like the place, but I felt that, I'd done whatever I could do. And then I had an opportunity to move to Addis Ababa. And at that time, it was another difficult moment because we had a toddler and we were expecting the second one. And then you have to make a decision where for the first pregnancy, I was a student. So I wasn't there for the entire pregnancy. The second one, 3 months in, I have this opportunity to move to Addis Ababa. And I had to trust my instinct and sort of disagree with my wife. And then it created the kind of tension that you can imagine.
Mm.
And sometimes I joke with her now and say, yes, if I hadn't done it then, we would not be where we are today.
Mm.
And I think that's part of also getting those moments where you cannot explain the why in the moment. You can only explain your blessing forward.
Mm.
Never, because when it
Yeah.
happens, you sort of look at this and say, oh my God, what am I going to do? 8th of September 2025, what am I going to do? But that's a reality that you face. And then, and then now you suddenly say, oh, okay, they had to do this for me to be where I am. So on the moment, it may look like, oh my God, it's terrible. But it's the same as when you die or when you experience death. At that particular moment, you think about only the fact that this is not just. But in reality, you don't know if it's just or not.
Mm-hmm.
You're just going through a period of time where the way you have to explain to yourself, those are the words that come to mind. A question of justice, equality, inequality, and why. And then to me, at some point in that process of grief, I was asking myself when it happened, why my father?
Mm-hmm.
And then at some point, I was like, but that question implies that you would prefer that somebody else's father dies. And it's almost a very selfish way of looking at the world. Why should you be the one whose father is spared? But how do you know when you're born that your parents are not going to live long?
Yeah.
Which suddenly creates then an opportunity for me as a father now to make sure that we speak about emotions, that we name them, that we engage in this, because whatever happens, you need to have the tools, the emotional tools to figure out by naming what it is. And I think a lot of us go through life with starting to name these things very late in the process because we just never had the tools for language to do so. So from a professional perspective, how do I land in that space? That when I became a father in 2012, so I asked myself, what is it that I would have loved for my parents to tell me who my grandparents were? And not just me living with them and figuring out as a young age who they are. And my paternal grandmother passed away before I was born, so I never met her. So the idea of writing then came from there, back in 2012, of documenting who my parents were and who these individuals were in my life so that my children can understand who these people are. So the first idea was a memoir. And then in February 2025, I was in San Miguel de Allende in Mexico for the book festival. The first workshop that I selected was on grief. And we sat around the table as strangers. And then suddenly it dawned on me that this is probably the one thing that we share the most, but we never speak about it, regardless of race, religion, gender, whatever it is that you name yourself. We all share grief. And the story of this man will always stay with me. He said, every time I introduce myself, I'm in a dilemma. When I say I have 2 daughters, I feel guilty for my third daughter. When I say I have 3 daughters, people are asking me, where's the third one? So he's in this constant dilemma. And I just pray to God that I don't have to learn what it feels like to lose a child. And I started writing this book the next day.
Wow.
And I said to Judith that was doing the workshop that when I land in Dubai next week, the following week on Wednesday, I'll send you what I have. That's how this book was born.
Wow.
I called Susanna, who lives in Argentina, and I was telling her about the experience and things like that. And I said, I would love for you to write the forward. I mean, I know Susanna for many years, but being in that spot, that's the first person that came to mind. So this book was really literally written between that workshop and the flight that I took. It's a long flight from Mexico to Dubai. And that's how the book was born.
That's so great. So there's something for me that stirs up in me, that's this idea of, and you saying, and now I am and I'm becoming myself. There's this feeling of these moments in life where we have a notion to do a thing that starts to put us in a certain direction, and then it wasn't quite a memoir, that's parked for now, but it was something about writing. It was something about capturing story, emotion. And then you just sort of, I guess I'll choose the grief workshop. And then it just opens into this book that, I mean, reading it, I would not have thought you just started writing this in February of 2025. I would have thought this has been 10 years in the work.
Yep.
But then just that listening that you did, that was, guess I'm writing this book because I just got fired. So here we are. And you just listened and knew this was the next right step. It was in the journey, and I was like, I can't stop lingering on these words. So I just marked them as so important to me, to my heart, to hear right now. Grief reminds us of our humanity. Humanity reminds us we are not alone. God made grief a journey. God distributed grief equally. So unbeknown to us, we could find equality in grief. And just this sense of, when you were talking about you're at the workshop and you're like, oh, this is the thing that we're all equal in, and we will all know grief. It's a powerful reminder at a time that feels so unsettling. I mean, that is for us, well, we're going to keep showing up and making space for grief because we're all in it. We're just collectively in right now.
And I think living in the UAE, the news about what was happening in Lebanon and in Gaza was present. You read it in the newspaper. And then when on the 20th of February, those missiles started coming on Dubai, we're very fortunate with a defense missile system. And I think only then it became very clear that our neighbors don't have the same protection.
Mm.
So even that experience
Yeah.
in such proximity is very different. So you go through these experiences in life of what you're grieving, but it's not at the same intensity, at the same level. One is not better than the other. One is not worse than the other. It's just that there's that experience. And once we start to recognize that our humanity a little bit more, and we acknowledge that grief is probably the common factor or denominator in our lives, maybe we'll appreciate this situation differently. No, I remember a couple of months ago, I saw the pictures of a couple of buildings that were burning in Hong Kong. So I saw it and I moved on to the next thing. And this has been on my mind because I asked myself, how did I get to a place where this grief it's almost if I'm become numb to it, going back to that 11-year-old that was just didn't know how to name it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the challenges that we face as humanity today is that empathy is no longer something that we accept as a common thread to unite us. So I can no longer feel for the others because I am bombarded with information that is just too much. And I have to start thinking, okay, how do I protect myself from all these information, which is often not necessarily good news? And that is a challenge for our generation. How do we make sure that the next generation has empathy? Because we are losing empathy as adults and we become numb to many of the things that are happening around us. And we have to find a way to recover because our humanity is at risk. If you can no longer feel for the other, then what is that humanity that we share? So grief then becomes that thing that we can all hold on to as a way to connect. The three of us are connected because you chose grief as a way to hold space for things that are often about just crying. But then you realize that I am still alive, And as the title of the book says, I Can Breathe. And I chose that title so that everyone that reads it is talking to himself or herself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the opening, there's such beautiful openings. There's so much context, which I really love. You talk about the cover and the intention of the cover. And then, of course,
I just want to say, as graphic design was my previous life, and I really appreciated reading the process of the cover. It was beautiful. This is
Thank
the
you.
level of meaning that usually goes into a good cover or a good piece of abstract art.
you would be able to appreciate it so much at an even deeper level. And then, so then we have our letter from Susanna, and then you have a preface. And as I was reading it, I admit I was taken aback. You cared about what was happening here. You write about George Floyd in this, and being in the States, I don't know that we could have known if it was news everywhere. And so to see that, I read it twice because I just was like, wow. It was just a beautiful connection of recognition and sorrow. And of course, that his death was sorrows on top of sorrows. It wasn't only a man's murder. It was, systems, and it was just a country of neglect and abuse, and sort of we're wrestling with that in the most shocking of ways on a daily basis. And so I think it feels so normal to us, sadly. I mean, it's devastating and it's sad, but it feels so normal that I think we have to, even as Americans, to remind ourselves our citizens shouldn't be being killed on the streets. Our children shouldn't be shot in schools. Not all of us, but sometimes it's like, oh, yeah, I heard there was another one. Or they don't make it to the news. They don't even make it to the news. And so to see that George Floyd, whose murder was really such an impetus for a reckoning in our country, that I still hope we can continue on. Again, we could pick that back up and keep going. But it felt so personal. And then to see it reflected in your book was just, I don't know, it just created another thread between you and us, Carl. And to end with this beautiful reflection, a poem on breath, of this reminder to all of us. And I think when we have these moments of grief, whether it's a big D death, the loss of someone that reminds us that we are alive and reminds us of our own mortality, we all know it's coming, we just don't know when. But also these little D deaths, these little deaths of Andrea as the museum researcher, Carl as the finance guy in Dubai. These little deaths that we have grief for, but that also give us a shimmer of there's all this life. What do you want to do with it?
Absolutely. Going through this exercise of writing was me going through the full spectrum of emotions that you can have. And being a father, you want to share the full spectrum of emotions with your children so that they explore all of them as they're growing up, and that they don't get surprised by what is this.
Yeah.
And I remember speaking to the children about the loss in terms of a job. And as parents, we made the decision to keep them so that they finish the school year. It's not the most financially sound decision, but we have to give children the opportunity to understand that you can deal with a crisis as a family. And you give them the tools to understand that this happened to my father, but he managed to go through it. Because it's the same experience as dying. It's not physical, but it's emotional death, where suddenly things that you thought were normal are no longer there. But if, as young children, you are then uprooted because this happens, then your emotions will always be connected to the fact that when something happens which is sudden, then everything else collapses. And that's our responsibility as parents, as community members, to hold something steady and make choices between maybe more money in the bank account and emotionally stable children that can see the sacrifices to keep that balance. And it's not their responsibility to figure out. And I remember a friend of mine, when I was telling her the story of what we decided to do as parents, she said to me, my father lost his job when I was exactly the same age as your children. And I still have a trauma from that experience because My mother insisted that to pray for my father, but I didn't know what it meant. So suddenly, as a young adult, I had this responsibility on me for something that I just don't understand. So as I listened to her, she's an adult now, but she's still grieving that opportunity that was stolen from her as a child to just be a child.
Mm.
So there are things that we do as parents that have an impact on the emotional stability of our children, on the mental health of our children, and being able to hold steady and ask a very simple question. How do I preserve my children in this period of transition? Of course, it was hard on me. It was hard on us as a family, but there was no way I would have sacrificed their mental stability and the opportunity to see how one can deal with a crisis because I wanted to have a little bit more money in my bank account, to be more something else. That is priceless.
In so many ways, primarily our world is set up to distract us from feeling our feelings. And I think of what you were saying feels like this whenever we start our grief retreats or our grief groups, we talk about not getting into comparative grief because, yes, people are experiencing in a room of people, someone's grief is unimaginable in some ways, like they lost a child and you don't want to even know what that is to experience. And then maybe what people are bringing is what might be perceived as a more manageable grief, like divorce grief or something. And I always love the idea, and I heard Francis Weller say it, where when people think, who am I to grieve this thing when someone else is grieving something so much bigger? And he says, who are you if you don't tend to your grief? And it's this piece you're talking about. That is our doorway in to being able to feel empathy, be able to have humanity. Yes, I don't know a grief at a level of horror that some people are experiencing right now, but because I tend to my grief, I'm crying, I'm feeling grief that they are experiencing that, even though I know it's so different to experience it. And then it changes how we make choices and show up as humans. And when you don't feel that, I don't like what people become who don't feel that, who can be so righteous that it's okay for children to die in a school, for genocide to happen, for, anything that we're bombarded with. So thank you for bringing all of that in. It's so important. And I think we're at a turning point in, are we choosing our humanity or are we shutting down? And we have to just start to turn towards every single little emotion that's here and make space for it.
Yeah. A sense of gratitude
Mhm.
to have been able to share with both of you that moment of unity, that humanity, and you speaking to someone who grew up in Abidjan in Cote d'Ivoire and now living in Nairobi that has carried different pieces of grief along the way. And that's what brought us together, and then there are billions of people out there that either don't know the words to put to it, but it's there because grieving is really, you only grieve what you love in a way. And I think that to me has been revelation. If you don't have that emotional connection, it will happen and then you sort of on, but you grieve and then, you lose a toy when you're a child. And I remember being a 7-year-old, having a younger brother that was born. And then very quickly when he turned 1, he started destroying everything I had. And my parents were very comfortable with that idea. And I was like, okay, what is it? So you grieve these moments. So I think to me, it's really a sense of gratitude because the work you are doing is important to millions of people that you probably will never meet in person. And sometimes I get a message from somebody from somewhere that I don't know that has read the book and tell me it has helped me to go through my own grief experience. And finally is that we wear different hats, different masks, but the one that we have to be able to remove is how comfortable we have to become with grief. We should not be shy about grief and we should not be hiding from it because it is part of daily life. You lose your wallet. Yes, you grieve that piece of whatever it is, if it's just plastic or whatever you had you grieve it. for some reason. But we don't see it as well. It's, oh, I need to go and cancel my credit cards and all this. But it's something that you lost. And there's a reason why this has happened that you always don't explain. So yeah, I really, really deep sense of gratitude for you having made the time to read the book and to invite me and here to have this conversation.
Thank you, Carl.
Thank you, Carl. So, yeah, we'll end our podcast with a question about grief, a reflection on grief. And today, what's something about grief you only understood after living through it? Just a minute to think of our answer.
I understood the meaning of patience.
Mm.
You can't rush for grief. Even 25 years later, there are moments where it just hits.
Mm-hmm.
And I've learned to sort of accept those moments. And that patience is definitely something that has helped me to go through the new episodes of grief that came along the way. And then recognizing that it will hit, to be in a loud moment. And then when you least expect it, it will come. And those often comes at moments of joy, where you wish you had those people around you, either to hug them, to share those moments with them, and to have just them looking at you with that pride. But you have to imagine it.
How about you, Andrea?
I think I would say how physical grief is. It really caught me by surprise. It was the day of my dad's funeral, and I had not yet seen him. And my siblings and my mom had seen him the night before. And they called me and said, Andrea, you need to get there before the funeral. You need to see him before there's other people. And I think they knew more than I did that it was going to be a physical experience. And even as we were driving, my husband was driving, and I could feel this. I couldn't get comfortable. I couldn't breathe well. And it was like I had this stabbing pain in my back. And I thought I was losing my mind. I was like, what is happening? And it was the trauma of grief in my body. I couldn't take a deep breath. I was having what would probably amount to not a full blown, but a panic attack. And then seeing him, and I couldn't make my body walk toward his coffin. I was out of my body. I couldn't look at my legs and say, walk forward. So just how just grief just overtook my body. That was shocking to me. Yeah. How about you, Rebecca?
I feel like the thing that really stands out to me in that moment of acute grief and meeting people and realizing for the first time, oh, no one needs to do anything. There's not a way to get it right. And if people can just show up and not know what to do, but just not leave you, it's that leaning in. And it taught me something. I was having this dual experience of, my dad died. I have to tell people are being weird. People are moving away. But then there are people who are just, I don't know what to say, but I'm here. Or they just show up with food or whatever. Oh my gosh. Now I know a thing that actually makes a difference that I didn't know made a difference before I had felt a grief like that. So
Yeah.
showing up when you don't know what to do is pretty
Yeah.
important to show up.
That's such a beautiful thing to leave with people. Even if you've experienced grief, sometimes you can feel not sure what to do, but you just show up. Carl, what a beautiful conversation. What a beautiful heart connection. What a beautiful book. We will link to it, of course, in our show notes. And I wish you so much success in whatever this becoming chapter of your life is. And this is a beautiful first start. So thank you. Thank you, Carl.
You're welcome, Andrea. You're welcome, Rebecca.
Yes, thank you. And I'm hoping you can close us out with the poem, You Can Breathe.
You can breathe. When you reach the end, you can breathe. Breathe. You just began. Breathe. When you begin, you create. Breathe. Breath begins at the trauma of life. Breathe. Life continues with trauma. Breathe. Today begins with trauma in mind. Breathe. tomorrow ends farther than today. Breathe. Trauma in the past, life in the now, all more to come. Breathe. You are breathing. You are becoming.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you to our listeners. Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you for listening to this episode of All the Grief. You can find us on Instagram at All the Grief Pod. And please take a moment to rate our podcast and share us with your friends. We'd love to keep expanding our reach to all the people who could benefit from conversations on grief. Take care.